Welcome back to Purely IFS, a show that aims to support IFS professionals by offering clarity and discussion on the various fascinating aspects of the model. I'm Emma Redfern.
And I'm Gayle Williamson. Today on Purely IFS, we're going to look at direct access.
And because it's such a big topic and important skill to develop, and one we'll no doubt return to, we thought we'd just focus today on one particular aspect of explicit direct access.
Explicit direct access is basically where you as a therapist talk directly to a client's part. And we find it's something that beginners are really nervous to do, which is understandable.
But if your parts don't let you take the leap to try it, then you're going to really struggle with many clients.
Yeah, because as much as our aim might be to get clients into relationship with their own parts through insight work, the reality is that this may not be possible at the beginning of therapy, in particular, or with clients who have a lot of trauma and extreme protectors. Can you remember, Emma, the first time that you took the leap and spoke directly to a part?
Well, I really wish I could recall the details, Gayle, and I don't. However, I do recall the calm and the curiosity and a real feeling of freedom of not being constrained. And when I do direct access, it's like some sort of permission has opened up inside of me, and I'm offering that to the client. And it's like we can both then do what comes naturally, relate to each other directly. So even if I'm talking with an angry part or a part that feels angry or a part that's a I don't know part, we can talk to each other. And I know your initial experience of direct access probably wasn't like that. So can you tell us about yours?
Yeah, for me, I was immediately in the deep end, talking to a very resistant and annoyed part that fired various questions at me in quick succession. At times like that, there really is no choice but to rely on self and just respond to the part authentically and relationally. I do recall that there was another part of the client doing some narrating as well. That was occasionally coming in and saying things like, "Oh, he's really not happy with what you're saying," or "Wow, he's really giving you a hard time, isn't he?" And then me falling back on my 5 Ps of the therapist self and being a bit playful, trying not to be too serious so that I could laugh along with what the narrating part was saying. And somehow I passed the resistant parts test.
Yes, so we had very different experiences. And what I'd suggest to the listener is that people training in IFS use whatever opportunities possible to practice it. So practice direct access when the stakes are relatively low, like in supervision or training triads.
Sure.
Or with clients your parts allow you to be present with lots of self-energy, so that later, maybe when it's important or unavoidable to use direct access in your clinical work, your parts trust the you who isn't a part to be curious and do that, to actually talk directly to the part. And I understand that these days in level 1 trainings with the Institute, there is much more attention paid to direct access than when I trained. And there's more opportunities, hopefully, to practice in practice groups and so on.
Oh, that's good to know. I'm wondering, will we just give listeners a brief recap of the different forms of direct access and what they involve, Emma?
Yes. So direct access is the alternative approach to insight. When a protector won't unblend, or an exile overwhelms the system unexpectedly, perhaps, the therapist speaks directly to the unblended part. Explicit direct access is when we speak to a part and make it explicit that this is what we're doing. For example, can I talk to the part directly? The client agrees, and then, hello, am I speaking to the part feeling angry just now? And then, of course, while using explicit direct access, we are using the IFS protocol, but typically just the 5th and 6th Fs. We use the befriending questions and address the protector's fears.
Yes, because we don't need to use the first 4Fs if we're already using direct access.
As I remind supervisees sometimes, if you're talking directly to the part already, it's redundant and doesn't make sense to ask, where do you find the part in or around your body? Because the part's already been found and is being met. And implicit direct access is talking to a blended part without explicitly acknowledging that this is what you're doing. A therapist, having done their parts detecting and holding the awareness that they're meeting a part of the client who is feeling angry, for example, might talk implicitly to it by saying, "So Emma, you're feeling very angry right now. Tell me more."
Yeah, you're curious to get to know the part, validate and appreciate it, I guess.
Yes, and I'll also inquire about how the part is trying to help by being, feeling, even expressing its anger. And this is the way to go when the client rejects the idea of parts or says, "What do you mean, step back? This is me."
Yeah, and as I always highlight, we are still using the protocol in implicit direct access, where we're holding the fifth and the sixth Fs in mind and asking some of the befriending questions when we get a chance. As you mentioned there, Emma, about asking how the angry part is trying to help.
And then, of course, there's what I think of as explicit indirect access, which doesn't really get talked about so much, I think.
Yeah, I thought it would be particularly useful for us to focus on this today. It's just so valuable to know about. So, explicit indirect access, or as I tend to refer to it, broadcast direct access, is basically where we talk perhaps to the client system as a whole or to a group of protectors. And it's kind of like we broadcast a message to them.
Yes. And Gayle, would you give us some examples of when it's useful to do this?
Sure. Well, perhaps your client has connected with an exile or an important protector in their system. You're using the protocol, the 6Fs, they're in self, and then it's apparent that another part has come in. You get that part to sit back after updating it, but then another part blocks the connection. So you talk to this part, you update it, but before you can finish updating, another part is making things feel really foggy or the client is feeling very confused.
Yes, that's very familiar.
So, as a therapist, this can often leave you feeling a bit overwhelmed and kind of scrambling a little. You're thinking, which part should I focus on? There seem to be so many. But generally, if several parts are coming up like this, you can probably assume that they've got concerns or fears about the target part that's being accessed.
That makes great sense, Gayle. And you highlight a really important point. So if as IFS professionals we can avoid going into this isn't working or some sort of judgment on the inside or even on the outside, we can pick up on the key thing happening for the client, the protector's concerns or fears. So direct access in all forms is a great way to address protector fears and help them feel safe enough, either to separate from the client or if they are separate, to feel safe enough to allow access or continued access to the exiles, so to allow more of IFS to happen.
Or, another example of where it's valuable to know about broadcast direct access. There are times where maybe everything has gone really smoothly. Perhaps there were a couple of protectors that you talked to at the start, and then you were able to go to an exile. Your client has good self energy. You're continuing to help build connection between self and exile. Some witnessing has begun, but then suddenly other parts start coming in. And when you check the self to part connection,
Yeah, by using the fourth F question, how do you feel towards the part?
yeah, you use the fourth F, but the client can't say how they feel. They've lost touch with the exile. So you might try to detect what protectors are there, but the client feels so foggy or confused that they just can't differentiate anything. So it's probably safe to assume then that the exile has said something that the protectors are worried about being revealed. Or it may simply be that the protectors are judging that the exile has said enough for now.
Yeah. And it's often the case that the system may only be willing to allow a small piece of witnessing at a time. Or sometimes, near the end of a long session of internal work, it makes sense that lots of parts are coming in as a way of perhaps signalling that's enough for today. So that's something that I think we can then address using explicit indirect access or broadcast direct access. So we're saying something here, Gayle, about how we are constantly tending to the therapeutic relationship with the person or the system in front of us.
Yeah, how is the client system responding right now? What does what's happening imply, as well as noting what's explicitly being shared?
I think Dick Schwartz uses the term riding the rapids for that flurry of concerned protector activity that can happen when we approach key exile sometimes.
Yeah, I really like that term, Emma, riding the rapids. It really captures it, doesn't it?
It does. So we really need to get used to navigating different relational waters with our clients. And sometimes it's more turbulent than at other times. Gayle, are you going to give our listeners a couple of examples from your client work of what broadcast direct access looks like?
Yeah, I thought it would be good to provide some of the language around this. So one client whose exiles carry beliefs of being stupid and the fear of rejection has a very dominant protector that doubts him. And I find you'll see this a lot in clients who, for example, maybe didn't do very well at school because perhaps they were dyslexic, but this wasn't recognized at the time. And so they develop protectors who do whatever they can to ensure that the person never again messes up, gets something wrong, and is then shamed or humiliated again. So the skeptical manager who makes the person doubt every decision, thought, feeling, their strategy being that if they question everything, they think the person will be less likely to get something wrong.
Absolutely. And although the protector has a positive intention, like many protector strategies, this one will only cause to happen what the protector is trying to avoid. In this case, it causes so much confusion that it makes it hard for the person to think clearly, and feeling stupid is therefore more likely to happen.
Yes, exactly. With this client, it's so striking. He'll suddenly get flooded with tiredness. Then the skeptical protector makes him start doubting what he's hearing from parts or seeing. His self-like manager then tries to figure it all out. And then a fourth protector comes in with just huge frustration over what the other parts are doing. So at times like that, it's important to first do your parts detecting for the client. So saying something like, lots of parts are coming in right now, aren't they? And then you can try and identify them if you can. So you may be saying, sounds like the one that makes you tired or the one that questions you. And I can also hear all the confusion and frustration too. And then instead of getting the client to connect with each one and asking them to sit back, what I can do is I can address them all at once. So I continue saying something to the client like, well, they usually show up like this when they're concerned about something. So I want them to hear that I know that they must have a really good reason for coming in, and I'd just be interested to know what that might be. And last time we did this, the client heard in response, he's only a baby. So I replied, can you say more? Because of course it's not something I need to figure out. The part replied to me, he can't handle this. And I replied, well, it makes sense that you're very strong right now if you think he's only a baby. But I'm just going to remind you that John is 42 now, and he's working hard to help the baby that you see.
And then, of course, the protector might have a question or even a demand, which is, I think, perhaps what makes explicit direct access daunting for beginners. Therapists' parts get worried that they won't know how to respond if they're challenged or questioned. A protector might come back with, how? How can John help? Or even something like, but I want to help. Or I don't need help. And when supervisees raise such concerns, I reassure them using either explicit or implicit direct access I reassure their therapist part that they, the part, don't have to do the direct access. If they allow self to be there and curious, then the clarity and confidence of how to respond to parts and the ability to attune to the part in front of the therapist will be there.
Yeah. And that's exactly what this one did, Emma. It asked in a very dismissive way, how could this John help? And it's just a matter of being straightforward and direct about the process. So saying something like, well, if you're willing, John can connect with the baby, learn what the little one has been through, and then help him in any way he might need. And then, you won't have to work so hard keeping him hidden away. But my guess is that you're not going to really believe this. You're not going to really believe that John can help until you meet him. What do you think? Would you like to try meeting John?
So in that way, you then try to hand back to the client. You facilitate the meeting between self and the part, which is actually what we're going to be looking at in our next episode, the updating process and getting buy-in to meeting self.
And then the other example I wanted to go through was, sometimes you will come across a client who has such a good parts detector of their own.
Ah, yes, the kind where from the word go, they're able to tell you which part they're speaking from, and so the session just naturally flows into explicit direct access.
Yeah. So what this looks like with one of my clients is we'll begin the session, say hi, and she might start telling me about something that happened during the week in relation to her parts. And then she'll say, actually, I think this might be the part who's speaking right now. Yeah, I think I'm the 7-year-old. So this would be one of her hardworking managers, the 7-year-old that we know. And I might simply then say, oh, well, I'm glad to talk to you again. The part will reply, yeah, I think I'm the part that does all the seeing, because the other parts, they don't want to see. And I will respond, okay, and what's that like for you, etc. And in this way, I can spend the whole session sometimes in explicit direct access with one of her protectors. With this person, we haven't actually been allowed to connect to any exiles yet. But recently, as we were getting closer to some vulnerability and she heard a part saying, help me, several protectors quickly began blocking and confusing her so that she had difficulty getting any clarity about what was going on. And at times like these, I can recognize that as her protectors overwhelming her because they're still not ready to allow access. And instead of trying to differentiate which of her protectors are there and asking each one to sit back, I can talk to them all at the same time, broadcast a message to them. So firstly, I name for the client what I think is happening. I say, I think your protectors might be a bit concerned by what they just heard, so I'm just going to talk to them all if that's okay. And then I continue with broadcast direct access, saying something like, I just want to say to all of you that I'm aware a few things have been said today that may be upsetting. So I'm going to let you know that we're not going any further right now. I know that you need to take this slowly, and this goes at your pace, not mine. The protectors then pulled back, and then before we stopped, I also did a broadcast to the part that said, help me. So I said to my client, I'm just mindful of the part that said, help me. And in case she can still hear us, I want to let her know that we're working as hard as possible to help her, to really get to her and help her. The client then reported the part responded to me with, come quickly, we're dying, which, was very poignant to hear.
Absolutely. Gayle, that's a powerful case example. And I'm aware what happened didn't faze you, as you're extremely experienced in meeting and talking with parts in complex systems. However, some of the listeners may be less experienced. So I'd just like to make a process comment and share a metaphor. So the process comment, it's important to trust self's perspective, which is highly systemic, and not follow too rigidly to going for a target part at times.
Yeah.
So a message here from an exile came up and you could have made a beeline for that part. However, your experience of the client, the IFS model, and the way her protectors react almost en masse helped you see that breakthrough help me message. You saw that as a point in therapeutic process to slow down, not to rush ahead. And the metaphor I came up with, so hopefully it might be a bit interesting to people. Imagine you're off to a party to see a particular friend who invited you, as they get nervous in social situations. You arrive, the door is opened by someone other than your friend, maybe a maitre d', a bouncer, a coat attendant, or a relative letting you know where to put your coat, etc. Great. Now, in the external world, in real life as it were, you don't barge past this person without acknowledging them. Desperately scan the crowd to reach your friend, you're still in your coat, you're knocking through people as you try and reach the target person. That would be disruptive and possibly even panic people in the crowd. No. You respond to the greeter or the person holding the boundary, and you may or may not get access depending on how you respond to that person. If you aggravate the bouncer or you've forgotten your invitation, things might go a certain way. Now, therapist caretaking parts might feel offended at what I've just said, because, we have parts that want to rush in with their emergency responder outfits on, or, as I jokingly say in supervision, with their underwear on the outside. And that urge is understandable, as in so many ways it often is a life or death situation inside for exiles. But gaining access from a cooperative protector will ultimately speed up safe access.
Yeah, very important.
So as IFS professionals, we can do what we're good at. We meet, greet, and address the concerns of parts making themselves known. That's another kind of way of talking about what direct access is. If I think of it as meeting people on the inside, it somehow takes the fear out of it for my parts, and it might help with your fearful parts. It's meeting people on the inside.
I'm glad you highlighted that, Emma, because I think that that's what often causes a lot of frustration in beginner IFS therapists. It's a sense that their parts are not content with the client part in front of them. They have an agenda. They're trying to get somewhere. They have their eye on a target ahead in the party. And when the one in front of them doesn't seem willing to move aside, they get frustrated or even irritated.
Yes, and there's a great saying in IFS, and I apologise, I don't know where it originates, but the saying is, what's in the way is the way, or maybe who is in the way is the way.
I like that.
Perhaps the last thing we'd like to touch on today is the use of broadcast direct access when there's a lot of fear in the system, due to a party who thinks suicide is a really good idea. Firstly, the IFS professional, the therapist or practitioner, will need to work with their own parts, who may be frightened of talking to a part threatening suicide, so they can be present with curiosity, clarity and courage, as well as an accepting, open-hearted approach.
Yeah, I think therapists especially carry a lot of fear from our former non-IFS trainings about the suicidal client. Whereas, of course, in IFS, we know that this is just another part that we can talk to. It's not that we take it less seriously, not at all, but the part pushing suicide is still a protector who ultimately has good intentions and who likely has one of the hardest jobs in the system. So we need to negotiate with it and offer some hope.
Yes. So in terms of addressing the fears of the parts scared of the suicide part, it's tricky because often these parts won't come forward to be met. In which case I might guess what to say based on what I already know of the client and their history, or based on my clinical experience, and I'll use broadcast direct access. I might say, I understand some of you are frightened to let me speak with the suicidal part. and I can assure you that speaking with it won't give it more power or make it more likely to take ultimate action. In my experience, when parts feel heard and validated, they become less extreme, not more. And parts are usually also not what they seem. So getting to know this part won't be what you expect. My guess is that the part you're afraid of thinks that dying is the best solution because it doesn't know there might be other solutions available now.
Yeah, that's nice, Emma. I can imagine how that would help soften the scared parts. But what about the client who has experienced past suicide attempts? How would you address the scared parts then?
Sure. Well, I might say, I can really get how you and other parts are frightened of the suicidal part, and that's why you block access to it. And this might be linked to the fact that parts of you are still carrying a lot of distress from the past attempts. And if you allow us access to those parts, we can help them let go of that old distress, and we can work out together how to do that safely.
So you just name it. You're just very straightforward about it, and you're still keeping the key aims of direct access in mind, including validating and acknowledging the part's fears, and then offering hope that things can change.
Yes, absolutely. Another way I might use broadcast direct access is to draw attention to self inside me. So I might address the protective fears in the client I've already got an established relationship with, saying something like, "It makes sense to me how scared of the suicidal part you all are, and I'm wondering if you can really look at me and see and sense that I'm not scared of meeting with this part. And or I invite you to ask inside and see if there are any other parts in there who can vouch for who I am and how I've already been with and helped other parts with extreme roles. And of course, if I do have parts scared of me meeting an extreme protector in the client, I'll need to attend to their fears too inside me."
Great. And then, Emma, I guess you'd maybe to another client reference their self as a way of hope merchanting.
Yes, so using direct access or broadcast direct access and saying something like, and I'll use my own name here for the name of the client, which is relevant as I have had some suicidality in the past. I might say, "I get how scared of this suicidal part you are, and I'd like to introduce you to the Emma who isn't a part, and see how calm, courageous, and safe she feels. And my guess is that the Emma who isn't a part wasn't available in the past, but she is now. Would you be willing to meet with her?" All the time, direct access of whichever variety is about building trust, relationships, safety, and offering hope and potential.
Yeah, and listening to you, Emma, it reminds me to say that it's good to adjust our tone of voice when speaking to parts. I notice that you speak in a really gentle way.
Sure. So there's something for me about remembering that even when we're speaking to a client's protector, we're often speaking to a young part, a child. So I want to speak from a place of non-attachment, warmth, and welcome. Ideally, I want to sound like I want to get to know the part, because I do, that I'm speaking to. So there's no tone of, "you must listen to me," or "do this, try that." And I'm not using a parental, persuasive voice. I'm feeling respectful, curious, and open to negotiating and hope merchanting. So for me, it's best to do direct access with plenty of access to my self energy, rather than coming from an agenda of wanting something to happen or needing to control something.
Yeah, and if I could really encourage listeners, don't forget about playfulness. Laugh with your client when you get the chance. Again, pre-IFS, I can recall feeling like I was doing something wrong. If ever I felt maybe I was being too friendly with a client, that we almost got on too well. Because in traditional therapy, you're worrying about transference and countertransference. And of course, we also wouldn't reveal too much of ourselves. Well, that's not going to work with parts. You do need to be prepared to be truly authentic with your client's parts in service of the relationship and building trust, where you may occasionally be asked personal questions. A part once asked me how old I was. So obviously I had to say, I didn't actually mind, but when I did say, the client opened his eyes in shock at the answer, and we burst out laughing because he'd been out by about 20 years and what he thought I was.
Well, that's a great example, Gayle, and I guess it would have been funny if he'd gone 20 years the other way as well.
Yes.
Yes. But it reminds me about what Dick writes about in his chapter in IFS New Dimensions, edited by Sweezy and Zizkind. He talks about playfulness as a lightness that accompanies self-leadership. And it's not that self-led IFS professionals don't take the suffering of parts and of clients seriously. It's just that from self's perspective, protectors can seem less threatening and almost cute in how they so desperately want to be in control or in charge, even of the therapy and the therapist. And playfulness is a great antidote to fear. So helping our clients feel less fearful of their parts can help the client too to access playfulness.
So thanks for joining us again today on Purely IFS. We'll be back in January with an in-depth look at the updating process and helping parts buy into meeting self. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.